Hey, good afternoon, Tarang. How are you doing?
Hey Justin, I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to have this conversation. One, I wanted to start off with sort of what got you into Agile and coaching, and then the next question will be sort of how do you see things going if you don't necessarily have a Scrum Master on your team?
Cool. Yeah, so let me start with how I got into Agile. It was actually quite serendipitous. I happen to know a former colleague who worked at ThoughtWorks. I'd never heard of ThoughtWorks, never heard of Agile at the time. I interviewed, started reading a little bit more about it, and coming on the back of many waterfall engagements that ended up in complete disaster. It was like, hey, where has this firm and where has this method been all my life? I wish I'd done all of my work in software using those methods. But hey, a few years in, I learned my lessons and I got into to Agile. So I got into ThoughtWorks about 10 years ago, and ThoughtWorks has been associated with Agile at the forefront of it for a while now. So that's where I got going. And coaching, again, just because of the reputation ThoughtWorks has, we get called on a lot to help introduce agile in organizations, help them help large enterprises adopt agile at scale. So sometimes that means going in as a coach. Sometimes that means doing delivery while trying to enable some client folks so that they can pick those ways of thinking, some of those techniques, those practices from us. So it's been a few, maybe 8 or 9 years since I've been doing either formal or informal coaching of teams.
Okay. So since we started out this conversation that you have a slightly different perspective, the team, right? We think about Scrum having a Scrum Master, a product owner, and then the team, those being sort of the three typical roles.
Yep.
What do you see as a model of working now that really supports a team's ability to deliver great products and meet constituent needs?
Mm-hmm. So maybe one bit of background. I think because ThoughtWorks, the thinking that ThoughtWorks has always had about the agile space stemmed from extreme programming roots and not from Scrum roots.
Okay.
There's always been this notion that it's a team sport, and the role of a Scrum Master, for example, didn't there isn't really a formal equivalent in the XP world. Sometimes a team may have a project manager, or I think ThoughtWorks invented this role called an iteration manager as a part-time role, but it's always de-emphasized those individual roles in favor of the team. So yes, there's been product owner roles and maybe developers, quality analysts, those type of roles, but we've never seen iteration manager or equivalent of a Scrum Master as a full-time role that must be there on every team. It's a case-by-case basis. So that sort of leads me to my thinking and philosophy around this is that the way teams can be successful is not because of individual roles that know how to do their roles well, but if those teams themselves can be self-organizing and self-sustaining and can share in the responsibility of delivering a great product without needing someone in a directive capacity. So I look at both product owner and Scrum Master as more guiding, guiding, shaping, mentoring on teams as leaders, as opposed to being the sole authority or the people making all the decisions. It's like I said, it's a team sport, and in my perspective.
Okay, great. So you mentioned that there's a case by case basis. Can you give an anecdote or your best sense of when's an example of when a Scrum Master makes a lot of sense?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of factors that I look at normally. One is the team size. The more people there are, the more communication threads on a team. You might often need someone to help facilitate some of that, to help make sure that everyone's focused on the same set of outcomes that the team's looking to deliver, making sure that things don't get lost in all of those communication threads that are going on. The other is just the complexity of what the team is taking on. If there are a lot of dependencies on other teams, a lot of dependencies on other systems, then if there is a lot of coordination to be done with people outside the team, that's when I would look for someone, maybe a specialist to do a role like that. But if it's a small team, working on a medium to low complexity, I think we doesn't have that many dependencies, we normally would just share that role. A business analyst or a product owner or a quality analyst might play that role on a sprint to sprint basis, maybe switch out every few sprints, maybe continue for a few months, and then someone else wears that hat, but it's not a separate full-time role.
Gotcha. How do you how do you come at addressing the concept of removing the blockers, right? The idea that a dedicated Scrum Master sometimes has built relationships across the organization. So removing blockers, not that it's easy, but with the relationships having been built, they're able to leverage those relationships in a constructive way to support their team. Whereas a shared Scrum Master responsibility to facilitate removing blockers. So how do you have this self-organizing team address that concept in a way that's constructive?
Yeah, so I think of it as traditionally Scrum Masters have had two or three primary functions. One is to address blockers and get things out of the team's way, like you said. The other has been in making sure that the team is working on the right things. Priorities are in the in the right order. That people are surfacing issues and blockers that do need to be resolved, and communication is working smoothly. So the second part of it is something that I think certainly needs to be a shared responsibility on the team, where making sure that we're operating well as a team, surfacing blockers, raising our hands and asking for help, making sure we're communicating well, making sure we have a good sense of the priorities of the product owner as a team. All of that shouldn't be funneled through one person, shouldn't need to be directed by a Scrum Master. Or the product owner for that matter. The part about removing blockers, completely get it. It's often more of a relationship within an enterprise or within an organization that counts for, so I wouldn't expect someone new to the organization or someone, still learning the ropes of a particular craft to take that on. So it won't necessarily be, hey, here's a hat and anyone on the team can wear it. Maybe a small number of people on the team can wear it. And if it does turn out that actually there are so many dependencies or blockers that we face that we need this expertise of using those relationships to unblock the team, then maybe it does need a full-time role. But we won't start out with that assumption. We'll start out with the assumption that two or three of maybe the most seasoned people on the team can play that role on a rotating basis. And then if we need to, someone takes it on full-time.
I get it. I understand it. Makes sense. What have you found that self-organizing teams really get charged up about in a constructive way? What do you find when, asking differently, when a self-organizing team is empowered, do you find that because your ThoughtWorks, everyone sort of gets that Kool-Aid or has drunk the Kool-Aid, so it's less of an issue? But when you're working with a client and that client is coming from the background of not necessarily having been empowered, and they're working with the ThoughtWorks guys who are very much in the sort of like, hey, we are empowered to do everything we need to do. How do you help champion that mindset to the client so that way it helps to take hold, kind of like, planting a garden?
Yeah. So it's a multifaceted problem. It took me a while to recognize some of the enabling factors at ThoughtWorks that made it possible for our teams to operate in that way. But now, when I work with clients in enterprises, it's not just about, someone saying, okay, I empowered this team to do X. It takes a lot of changes. It takes a cultural mindset shift. It takes the courage for a senior leader to say, what decisions that I'm used to making in my position, and then telling people what to do. Being able to give up that decision-making power. It's a shift, often in command and control driven organizations. Even simple things like communication, not needing to route communication with other teams through managers, not needing to ask for permission before going and, let's say, going and talking to the database guy or going and talking to the enterprise architect to solve a problem. all of that is part of that empowerment. It's not just saying that you are empowered. There's a change in leadership behaviors for even for people outside the team, and thinking of themselves as servant leaders who are thinking of how can I best enable and support this team as opposed to how can I best direct this team. The simple thing of being comfortable with failure, and not penalizing people for mistakes. That's a cultural shift that takes time. So all of these are things when we bring this to an organization, we talk about all of those different aspects, and then help them figure out a path to enabling all of those aspects and not just autonomy for a team.
Great. So you touched on one element I'd like to revisit a little bit deeper, and that is the concept of the, I'll say, leadership, not executive team. So leadership in the way of people who have roles such as dev managers, directors of engineering. How does ThoughtWorks counsel suggest people who have roles like that to really support and embrace servant leadership? What does that look like in a tangible sense for someone who might have one of those roles?
So one of my colleagues has written about this in a book where he calls this there's a professor entrepreneur model when it comes to leadership. So the professors are essentially, let's say, the head of UX or the head of engineering, or even a dev manager. In some ways, thinking of it as what do I need to do to get this community moving forward, to have shared knowledge that's commonly shared, to be put to the best use. How do we make sure the learnings from one team transfer to another? How do I guide people in their career growth in a particular field? And taking on sort of that mantle of, I'm responsible for cross-team communication. I'm responsible for guiding and mentoring people in career growth. And then there's the entrepreneur model, which is people who are directly invested in the outcomes that these teams or these individuals are chasing after, and making decisions at different levels around those. And there, the model is very much what can I do to get things out of the team's way? What can I do to provide more visibility about why this outcome is important? What can I do to make sure that people who seem less comfortable, when we start out, I can make them more comfortable. So those are the ones who are sort of working with individuals on a day-to-day basis towards the achievement of the outcomes the team is, or the products the team is trying to deliver. And the professor hat leaders are making sure that from a long-term career growth perspective, they are looking out for the trajectory of people on the team, on different teams.
Gotcha. So when we met back at NetNumina, more than a decade ago, I guess at this point, we were very much thinking about design thinking, and user experience was more or less at the forefront of what we did, sort of, user experience, business, and architecture.
Yeah.
And so a lot of companies have grown into that. And how have you thought about some of those concepts that are designed?
Yeah, so traditionally, I think even in organizations that have adopted agile methods, there's still this water scrum fall approach to this, where design thinking is considered to be something that the user experience team does, and it's all upfront, and they will do customer research, and they will do information architecture, interaction design. They'll hand off some pixel perfect screens to a team to then deliver. And unfortunately, that suffers from the same challenges as traditional waterfall problems waterfall projects have faced. So the way we in recent times have started to look at it is that there are three parts to this model, all of which need to be owned by the same product team. One is the design thinking aspect of it, which is essentially just a set of tools to explore a problem space or a solution space. Then there is building the right things after using that exploration to identify what is it that truly solves the problem for the customer. What is it that helps us understand their problem and their context better. So that's, I think of lean startup style experiments in that space. And the third part of it is then agile delivery methods. Once you have some sense of what is the problem we're looking to solve for the customer and what direction should we take, using highly iterative feedback driven methods to to deliver technology products to customers. So if we combine all of those three things, so exploring a problem space, building the right things, and then using Agile to build them right, we and have the same team look at it as that's an end-to-end view that they need to take, and think of those as very lightweight decisions that get made at every stage till we can get to working software. Then that seems to make sure that the waste is minimized. It seems to make sure that you don't have ivory tower design, you don't have ivory tower technical architectures being put in place that nobody can actually use.
Great. So the idea is it's one team solving one constituent problem and iterating through.
Yeah. So then what becomes critical is then for that team to be truly cross-functional and have all of those capabilities on the team. So whether it is having the UX capability to be able to do lightweight research, or do quick interaction designs, prototypes that can quickly be put into production and tested with maybe 500 users. All of those skills from in technical architecture to user experience, product management, quality assurance, and development, all on the same team, to be able to make sure that the team has the capabilities to do that end-to-end cover that end-to-end life cycle.
Gotcha. So I'm curious, you mentioned one thing that I know there's someone out there who will probably say, well, so what do you do if you're a big defense contractor and you've got a lot of legacy code and you're building something new, or you're a bank, let's say. I know you and I have worked in financial services enough and know that that's something that they're hesitant to do for a very good reason, because they're trying to manage the risk. But what do you say to folks who have that hesitation to being able to move in that direction, having a full stack team, so to speak?
So there are, really two approaches one can take. One can say that, that legacy challenge that we have, or all the legacy systems that are currently slowing us down, if there is management buy-in to fix those, you can take two approaches. One is that you invest a lot of time and money in these multi-year programs to fix some of the legacy things, or to rewrite back-end systems, or convert old stored procedures into modern services, REST APIs, and so on. Or you can take an approach where you can strangle out your legacy on an as-needed basis. So saying, okay, if these are the 5 things we're going to do this year, what are the things we need to extract out? What are the silos we need to break down? What are the monoliths we need to cut out some pieces off to make these 5 things work? And next year, maybe when we pick up the next 5, we'll chip off a little bit more and a little bit more. So that's the approach that we recommend clients take, instead of trying to just replace those old systems.
Is there anything that you'd like to share with someone who is potentially going to watch this, how to embrace some of the topics that you've shared?
Yeah, so one critical thing is that hunger to learn. I every time I think that I now I've done this on a few projects, I think I'm getting pretty good at it, I discover a whole bunch of things that I don't know, and a whole bunch of new topics that I need to go read up about, or new thinking on known topics that I need to go read. So just reading widely, making sure you're reading what everything that's the latest thinking that's coming out about these topics, and not restricting yourself to reading about just what you consider your primary role. So if you're a designer, not just reading about how to do UX better in a lean environment or an agile environment, but reading about motivation, reading about what makes for good teams, reading about organizational design, reading about change management, and having that appreciation for what it takes to get to that target state that we want to move to. I think that's the key. The minute you put blinkers on and think of, hey, I'm a designer, or I'm a product manager, and I'm already pretty good at it, and I don't need to learn more. I think that's where you start to become obsolete.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, and be well.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much, Justin. Thanks for setting this up.